Unit 4, Period 4, Section 6. We're talking about the idea of abolition, and we've talked about the idea of, with William Lloyd Garrison wanting immediate emancipation of the slaves, and Frederick Douglass wanting gradual emancipation of slaves. Well, you need to know that there were actually slave rebellions. Um, some that come to mind are Gabriel Prosser, Denmark Vesey. The one that in this unit that we're going to discuss was in 1831, and it was by a slave preacher named Nat Turner. Now, Nat Turner preached to his congregation from the Old Testament a book called Exodus. And when his congregation heard about the story of the Israelites escaping from the Egyptians, they would ask this preacher when their time would come and when they would get freedom. And he kept telling them there would be a sign from God, there would be a sign from God. Well, the eventual sign came in the form of a solar eclipse, and Nat Turner said that it was time for his congregation to do something, and they went on a rampage across the South, killing over 60 whites across the South. They were eventually captured and by militia uh, from Virginia, and the surviving slaves were hung in front of other slaves. Also, because of Nat Turner's rebellion and other rebellions, these attacks eventually led to something called the slave codes, and Southerners became more strict upon their slaves, and rules were passed like slaves were stopped from carrying weapons, slaves had to abide by curfews. More stringent rules like that were applied because of rebellions like Nat Turner's. Second thing that I want to talk about here as it relates to abolition is a lot of students always ask, well, why did the Southerners have slaves? Well, there was a very strong pro-slavery argument from the perspective of white Southerners living in the South. And let me say this, statistically, 25% of white Southerners owned at least one slave. Broken down, that means 22% owned one slave and 3% owned more than one slave. That also left 75% of white Southerners not owning any slaves. So what was the pro-slavery argument? The 25% that were able to own at least one slave, and definitely the 3% that owned more than one slave, felt like slavery was an economic necessity, that they could not make money in the South if it wasn't for the backs of slaves. And this drawing here shows you the size of Southern plantations and just the amount of labor that it would take to upkeep and to be able to cultivate crops that were grown on farms of such tremendous size is the reason why you see this census here in 1860. You can see that, for example, in South Carolina, the free population, or the white and free black population in South Carolina, was 301,000, but the slave population was 402,000. In actuality, in the South, there were 8 million free people living in the South, but yet there were 3 million slaves, and this is in 1860. And so the point that's made here is that in at least two of the states that had slaves, the slave populations actually outnumbered that of the white populations. This concludes the Unit 4, Period 4, Section 6, slave rebellions and the pro-slavery argument.